We'll start with our motivation. So again, the motivation is the most important part of what we do. Why are we doing what we're doing? And to really look at our mind, take a moment, and how did we get here seated in this room or on the internet? What kind of motivation got us here? There may have been a distant motivation and an immediate motivation. They may have been the same, they may have been different. But what were our basic motivations for being here? And whatever our initial motivations were, we can amplify them, we can expand on them quite consciously. And so here really stretching the mind so that we're not just here because it's 6 o'clock on Thursday. That's not our motivation for being here. May have been the motivation that got us on here, but we can change that now. And think of the benefit that can come from our learning the Dharma. And then wanting to share that benefit far and wide so that its effects go beyond just us and beyond just this life. And so especially understanding that if we have some knowledge about debate and about logic and reasoning, it will help us tremendously to realize emptiness. And by realizing emptiness, we can clear all the obscurations from our mind. And the reason we want to do that is not only for our own well-being, but for the well-being of all living beings. Everybody who is suffering due to afflictions and karma. So let's have that far-reaching motivation for being here tonight. Okay, so last week we went through the introduction. I just kind of summarized some of the important points, and then we started reading from chapter 1. Because Bill really takes some time at the beginning of the book to really lay out the scope of the Buddhist path so that we understand very clearly where reasoning and logic fit in and why we're doing this whole process. Yeah, and I think that's quite important because, it's very easy for our motivation to get twisted. And I'm learning how to debate, and then I can conquer all these other people and prove them wrong, and maybe I'll be the best debater and I'll get some kudos for that and some acknowledgement, and who knows what kind of motivation that could creep into our mind. So he really starts talking about death and impermanence, and then goes into the nature of samsara a bit, so that we can really, put what we're about to learn within a Dharma framework and not make it just another topic that we learn in our education. So, last week he was talking a lot about impermanence and death, remember? So we'll continue where we left off. You can read along or you can just listen. It's up to you. But we were on page 15, the last paragraph. Now, given that people want happiness and do not want suffering, the challenge becomes how to play to win. Oh, this sounds like Donald might like it. That is, the question before us is not whether or not we will be in the game, but how can we possibly participate in life to achieve our wish to gain happiness and avoid suffering. Okay, so, he was saying before that there's no real dead beings, there's only dying beings. Yeah, so you can never escape life, because life is synonymous with dying. And, so the question is not how can we make ourselves non-existent, but how can we live in a good way? Because it's impossible to make ourselves non-existent. Okay, so that is the real rub. It seems to me that it is not so much death itself that is the rub, but the constant chafing of the wish to find happiness and avoid suffering, moment by moment, hour by hour, day by day, year after year, and perhaps even life after life. So this constant struggle we have for happiness. And it's a struggle, isn't it? Yeah, we struggle for happiness. Because we think our happiness exists outside of us. So as soon as we have that view, then everything becomes a struggle. Because we have to struggle with whatever we cannot control, trying to control it when we're doomed from the beginning. Okay. Why would we fear the rub of death if life were only suffering? Indeed, death might bring a great relief, a solace from suffering. We are constantly in motion, seeking to find happiness and avoid suffering. Why are you reading this book? It is this push to find happiness and avoid suffering that disturbs our peace, and death is only a part of that rub. Thus, what are the strategies for responding to events to improve our chances to gain happiness and avoid the difficulties that bring us suffering, or at least to limit the amount and duration of the difficulties? You may consider this within the context of this life alone, or if you suspect that there will be continued life after this one, you may consider this within a broader context. In either case, the more you can discover by your wit and observation, the better off you are. I recognize that sometimes we need the comfort of not knowing. For example, it may be that you need to allow the deceit and perhaps even believe that your partner is faithful in order to continue on. I don't know, you two work that out. But in general, the more you know and the more clearly you know, the better off you are. Yeah. So we do have this phrase, this thing in English, ignorance is bliss. Yeah. So something's wrong and it's going to throw me off. So just, deceive me, please. Don't tell me. I remember my mom, one time, she didn't say it in so many words, but by telling a story, the message was, if ever I am terminally ill, she doesn't want to know. The message was, lie to me. Okay. Yeah, I can't stand that kind of thing personally. But, some people, it's like, I only want the good news. I don't want to really know what's going on. But, that attitude can really leave us stuck, can't it? Because if we aren't able to really understand what is, even on a conventional relative level, then, we're going to be dragged along and deceived everywhere we turn. Yeah. Whereas, if we really are seeking the truth and want to see things as they are, it may not always be so comfortable to our ego, but at least we'll always know where we stand. So, Dharma practice takes a certain amount of courage that way, to really want to know how things are, even if they don't agree with our ideas and our opinions and what we, want to make us feel emotionally comfortable. Mm-hmm. Okay. So he said that in general, the more you know and the more clearly you know, the better off you are. Yeah? So here's a story that seems to relate. I didn't actually get the story very much, but anyway, one time in Charlottesville, not too long ago, I ran into a graduate student working in theoretical physics. I always carry around a collection of questions for people who might know about a particular topic. That's a good idea. Wow, we should really do that. For scientists, doctors, lawyers, police, priests, ministers, accountants, and so on. And I think that, doing that is the sign of a curious mind, a mind that wants to learn, a mind that wants to look outside of, just what it knows. The list of questions for physicists is a long one, and I often will ask the same questions over and over to different people. I ask physicists, how can it be that there is no center to the universe? Wouldn't there have been a place in space where the Big Bang happened? And since matter moves away from that space, wouldn't that be the center? The answers are generally consistent. It is my understanding that is faulty. Yeah. Well, this physicist in Charlottesville was particularly good at the answers, I thought. What I like, and this fellow was very good about it, is the commitment to move closer to understanding, even if it seems to contradict what we formally believe to be the case. Okay? So the willingness to, go further in and really learn and gain wisdom, even if it contradicts what we believe, even if it threatens our whole conceptual framework of who we think we are. And that's exactly what Dharma practice is going to do. It's going to shake the very foundations of who we think we are and how we exist and how everything and everyone around us exists. So we have to be willing, to be interested and to be willing to be shaken up a bit. Yeah. If, we come into Dharma and all we want is a confirmation of our opinions, we're not going to get very far. Okay. This shows real integrity and admirable open-mindedness. People wonder why we should care about such things as physics, such things as physicists routinely investigate, dark energy, dark matter, and so on. But what comes through is that they can think of no advantage in not knowing how things are. So that leads them to seek to know how things are. Yeah. So the same in our case, if we're trying to understand how things exist, whether we're trying to understand emptiness or to understand other people and how they think, which is a total mystery. Even trying to understand ourselves is a complete mystery. Doesn't make any, we don't make any sense to ourselves when we look closely. Yeah. But to see that there's no advantage in not knowing. So if there were some advantage in being ignorant of how we exist and how the world exists, then okay. If ignorance were really bliss, then okay. Yeah. But ignorance isn't bliss. And there's no benefit from walling ourselves off and just saying, this is too much, I can't do it, I can't do it, I can't do it. And we will run up against things in our practice. We all have, haven't we? You really love the Dharma, things are going well, then whammo! Something comes up and your mind just goes completely berserky. Yeah. You ever had that happen? Yeah. Like, every week, every day, to one degree or another. Yeah. But sometimes real kind of crisis times in our practice. So at that time, is the benefit, is there any benefit to sticking our head in the ground and just saying, oh, this is too difficult, I can't handle it, this is too scary for me to look at, give me some chocolate, please. Yeah. Is there any benefit to that? Yeah. No. Yeah. So maybe we need to approach things slowly. We don't have to knock our head against the wall. But, let's have an open mind and approach some of these scary things slowly, with compassion, with wisdom, going forward. Yeah. Because what's the benefit in just, going, I don't want to know. Like I did today when they said, do you want windows that are half an inch shorter on this side, half an inch shorter, half an inch shorter, 1.5 inch shorter on each fourth side? Do you want windows like that? And I went, I don't care. I can't think about that. So I think that's an okay thing to say. That degree of, I can't handle that, I think is okay. Somebody else can decide the size of the windows. I'll live with it. Yeah. But there's other things, that are much more important than the size of the windows that we can't, if we can't jump in and solve it right away, at least, approach it with an open mind and learn and be curious about it. Yeah. I don't think we need to be so afraid. Yeah. Sometimes we're quite afraid. We stop ourselves before we even start. Okay, Buddhists are like that too. And that particular physicist confirmed this as well. As Buddhism is one of his interests. Now, Buddhism is not science. However, they share a strong commitment to understanding how things are and a belief that there will be advantages to understanding. If something is real, we can think of no advantage in not knowing about it. Yeah, if something exists, if it's true, what's the advantage of not knowing it? Yeah. It may not matter too much, or it may take a very long time to figure out how to gain advantage out of knowing it. Okay, so there are certain things that may not be so interesting to us, that may not be so crucial for us to learn. Yeah. But there is no advantage in not knowing what is real. Think of the microbes on your cup, the DNA in our bodies. These kinds of things have always been there. They are real. So it is better to know about them. Unless you want to say, look, I don't want to know about the microbes on my cup, because then I'm just going to get paralyzed because I'm going to think every time I touch something I'm going to be sick. Okay? Yeah. If you think like that, then you really need to understand reality because you're hallucinating and making up a danger that doesn't exist. Yeah. I don't want to learn about microbes because then every time I touch this cup, I might get sick. Yeah. So then you really need to know about microbes and, you're not going to die from touching this. The Buddhists are like that in regards to death and impermanence. With every breath, we draw closer to death. Buddhists do not focus on this point because they are morbid or because they want to scare people. They focus on it because it is real. Death has always been so. It is real. So it is better to understand that clearly. That's why they talk about it so much, especially in the beginning. Yeah. I know for me, one of the things I appreciated so much, like even beginning with the first Dharma course I went to, was that they talked about death. And they talked about suffering and being unhappy. Because most of the environment I grew up in, the message was don't talk about death. Because if you do, it might happen. And, thinking that there's some advantage to not knowing about it. And, the same about suffering, Don't talk about it. There's nothing to do. We don't want to hear about it. If we talk about it, it might happen. Yeah. And yet, there was something in that whole approach to life from the people around me that just felt so false and so uncomfortable because it's very clear we're going to get sick and die, or at least die. We may die immediately and not get sick beforehand, but, if we live any period of time, we're going to get sick. Yeah. So is our mind prepared to handle sickness? Is our mind prepared to handle aging? Is our mind prepared to handle death? Yeah. Or when those things come up, do we just go, get me away from it? I'm going to go out to a movie. I'm going drinking and drugging. I'm going to go have an affair. I'm going to, learn how to play marbles. Something, anything, but look at what the reality of our experience is. Yeah, and most people live their lives ditching reality, not wanting to look at these things. Yeah, and then what happens when these things occur? Yeah, all we need to do basically is look at our old friends, look at our family. What happens when aging, sickness, and death occur? Yeah. And then I think of my teachers and how they dealt with aging, sickness, and death. Completely different than the way my family dealt with those things. Completely different. Serkan Rinpoche was in his 70s and his 80s, going around the world teaching. Look at His Holiness. He just turned 82, He's going here, he's going there, he's doing so much, traveling, talking to people, teaching, listening to what they have to say, dialoguing with people. His life is so vibrant, his mind is alert. There's no dementia there, no Alzheimer's there. And I don't think he spent much of his life watching TV, just zoning out. Or going to the pub or smoking a joint or whatever, what most people do. And so His Holiness's old age, Serkan Rinpoche, their old age, it was great, because they thought about aging and sickness and death when they were young. So when their body got old and their body started falling apart and they needed to lean on their attendants in order to walk, they weren't all freaked out. They weren't going, I'm old, nobody's going to take care of me, They weren't all worried. They just, adapted to the situation and went on. Yeah. And so, there you can really see the benefit of thinking about these things. Yeah, it doesn't make your mind morbid. It makes your mind aware. Yeah. So, and it's practical, because then you can, think, how would I deal with this? Because I know whenever I did a lot of reading on like the Cultural Revolution in China, and I kept imagining, now what would it be like to be one of those people who was imprisoned? Whether to be a Tibetan, imprisoned, a Chinese monastic imprisoned, whatever. What would it be like? How would I be able to practice? And I would imagine, sitting in a prison cell. Even the guys that I write to on the prison project, I imagine being them. How would I be locked in a prison cell, with a window that's this big, and I only get out of the cell 1 hour a day, and sometimes that 1 hour is either to bathe or it's to go in a concrete recreation area with chain link fences on the sides and above. Now, how would I do in that environment? Yeah. How would I do in a communist prison? Watching my friends get killed or whatever. Is my mind prepared to deal with those things? Because, the people who wound up in those prisons, when they were young, they never thought that's how their life would be. They never thought like that. Yeah? But you can see, it's very clear when you read about their lives. The people who had inner strength survived those situations. The people who had no inner strength, they just crumbled immediately and died. Yeah? So how do we have a strong mind? We have to be able to look at things and practice in our mind at least about, how we would practice if we were really in that situation. Yeah? And that only benefits us, You may rightly say that there are many things that are real, but there is no clear advantage in meditating on them. So why do Buddhists emphasize meditating on death and impermanence? Yeah. So maybe there's some things we don't meditate on, like the microbes in the kiddies, I don't think you do a whole meditation session on that. Yeah. But so why death and impermanence? Why is that more important than the microbes in the kiddies? Okay. So the context of this narrative is as a motivator for religious practice. So that's why, everything in the Lam Rim that we study, that we contemplate, it's done in order to motivate us to practice. So that's important to understand, because many people, they don't like the meditation on death and impermanence because they don't like thinking that they're going to die and that their loved ones are going to die. They don't like the meditation in the middle scope when you talk about the 3 kinds of dukkha and the 6 disadvantages of suffering and the 8 faults of being a human being. They don't like those meditations at all. Let's skip over those. Yeah. We like the bodhicitta motivations until it comes to the great resolve where we have to take responsibility for really benefiting sentient beings. But up until then, it's okay. We can manage it. As long, but not the equalizing and exchanging self and others too much. that one's not too comfortable. Seeing all sentient beings as our mom, yeah, that's good. But, as soon as it comes to the great resolve of we're going to get involved and make that happen, sorry. Okay? So, we need to see that, why are all these topics taught? Yeah, it's not just to make us uncomfortable and make us, queasy. It's really for the purpose of motivating us for our religious practice. Yeah, and so we have to see the benefit of our practice. If we don't, then it's going to be hard. Okay. In contemplating the human condition, what comes home to us is that our time is fleeting. Time for all of our activities. Finishing college, speaking to an old friend about what happened, going to visit a place that you long to see, whatever. Our time is fleeting. In this regard, I always remember that my father, who died at the age of 81, said several times that he wanted to visit England and Ireland, but he never did. He had the time for that. There was even the money for that. But he never went, and now he has passed away. And now I have lost my chance to help him to do what he wanted. Yeah. That is, his father not going to England and Ireland is not a great catastrophe. I don't think that would influence his future life very much. Yeah, but you can see that Dan had an aspiration to please his father, to help his father do something he wanted, which is definitely virtuous, but he missed that opportunity. Yeah. But we need to look, they always say have a bucket list. Okay, we need to look at our bucket list. Yeah, are the things on our bucket list really important? Yeah, I want to go to Peru and climb the Andes. If you die before that, is it really going to be a big deal? Yeah, on your deathbed, are you going to die regretting not having gone to Peru and hiked in the Andes? I hope you're not thinking about that when you die. I hope not. Yeah. So to really think, what our bucket list, because they talk about. There's been some studies that they've asked. Of course, college students, because those are the people they usually do studies on, but other people too, about what's important in their life. And then they ask them to really calculate, keep a timesheet of what they spend their time doing. And then at the end, to look and see, do you spend your time doing what you said was important in your life? And most people, when they do this, they find out no. Yeah, that they're not spending their time doing what they said was important. Yeah, so that is a big loss. Yeah. And especially as practitioners, if we think about future lives, we think about the possibility of liberation, and if we think about the condition of all sentient beings, then it's really important to make our bucket list very clear and spend our time doing, what is going to be important in that way. Yeah, so we always make our every year we get together, we talk about our what is it called? The attorney, what is it? a power of attorney. We do our power of attorney. We do our wills. We do our living will. We do all those things for, what we want to happen if we become, unable to state what we want. Yeah. Have you done a will about what you want the people around you to do in terms of Dharma practice for you? Yeah. Have you developed a will of what kind of things you want to train in that you think are going to be important for you before you get to that point, and then started going towards, accomplishing some of those things? Okay. The Buddhists offer a 3-point contemplation of death. Okay, you should all know this. So, death is definite, the time of death is indefinite, and at the time of death, the only thing that claims to help in any life that may come after this one is religious practice. So the purpose of this meditation is to increase a person's enthusiasm for and effort in religious practice, for now is our only chance to practice it. Yeah. Of all the motivators for religious practice, awareness of death and impermanence is the most effective. And, the only time to practice our priorities is right now, in this moment. Yeah. Some of us say, well, I've got to create the perfect external situation before I can practice. Yeah. So I've got to get this and line this and line that and line that and line. Then I'll go to Dharma teachings. Then I'll set up a regular daily practice. Then, I'll study or whatever it is. Yeah. Because now I'm too busy, I have to do this, I have to do that, and the other thing, and the other thing. Yeah? And in that way, the whole life goes by. Whole life goes by. Yeah? And we never find any time to practice, because we're always thinking we'll practice in the future. But the only moment that we're ever alive that we ever have to practice is this very moment. Yeah? So, it doesn't matter whether we're happy, it doesn't matter whether we're depressed, it doesn't matter whether people like us or people don't like us, whether we're angry, whether we're blissed out. This moment is the only moment we have to practice. So we got to practice in this moment. Yeah? And practice means transform our mind into virtue. Yeah, that's what it means. So every moment, try and, transform our mind into virtue if it isn't in virtue. Okay, so that's why we keep generating our motivation again and again every day. The contemplation of our human situation, the certainty of death, and the unstoppable impermanence is profound and compelling. Thinking of this helps energize us to do whatever it is we think we need to do to move towards having happiness and avoiding suffering. Whatever it is not necessarily limited to motivating our spiritual practices. Okay, there he's talking to people who aren't thinking about future lives. Yeah. Now, for a few moments, we have the opportunity to stand between the earth and the sun. So let us please move with intent and appreciation for these moments to do what we need to do to find happiness. And then there's a quote from Tecumseh, a Shawnee war chief. Prepare a noble death song for the day when you go over the great divide. When it comes your time to die, sing your death song and die like a hero going home. Yeah. So we have no idea how we're going to die, but whenever it is, we have to sing our death song. In other words, practice the Dharma, put our mind into the Dharma at that moment, you know? If we're in a car, looking like there's going to be a car accident in the next moment, you know, whatever situation we're in, we have to be able to switch gears and immediately, you know, if our mind isn't already in virtue, put our mind there. So, very often here at the Abbey, one thing people find difficult is that things change all the time. Our plans change all the time. Yeah? We say in our morning stand-up meeting, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and the moment after we say that, circumstances change, and X, Y, and Z don't get done, but A, B, and C get done. Or maybe X gets done, and then we have to go to Q and K, which we hadn't even entered our mind, you know. And then, so we have to like turn just all of a sudden to be able to deal with what is in front of our nose at any given time. Yeah, and so it's very difficult living here and being in that situation because we want predictability. Yeah, we want everything to be predictable, to be planned, to be on schedule. Yeah. And life is not like that. You know, every single moment, new causes and conditions are coming together and creating something new. We are in free fall all the time. Yeah. We want to stand on the ground and say, I'm going to control. Yeah. We're in free fall. Yeah. So we have to like just relax a little bit. And okay, we had a plan, and that's not what happened. Why is that such a surprise to us? Yeah? Why is that such a surprise? One of my teachers, whatever the schedule is, you then know when teachings will not be. Yeah, teachings are scheduled for 7 in the evening. If they start by 10, you're lucky. Yeah. Sometimes they start at 11, sometimes they start at 12, sometimes they don't start. They get postponed until the next day because he decided he wanted to do something else because something else came up. Yeah. So, you know, it was very good training for those of us who like consistency. Yeah. It's like, this is consistent chaos. But then you realize you don't have to label it chaos. Yeah. You can just say this is what it is. If you label it chaos, I don't like consistent chaos, I want predictability. Can't we follow a schedule? And then you have a schedule, and it's like, I can't stand this schedule, why do I have to follow it? Yeah, we're so funny, aren't we? Yeah? Okay, now chapter 3, reasoning within the Buddhist context. Okay, so now he's going to put it right in the context. So how long is this chapter? Okay. The human situation, constant vulnerability to death and impermanence, is the backdrop in front of which we all perform. We want happiness and don't want suffering, but the vulnerability to death and suffering that is imposed on us by the reality of impermanence often frustrates our wishes. Awareness of death and impermanence is the first essential and a constant point of emphasis for reasoning within the Buddhist context. So one of the first things the example that we use when we learn how to form a syllogism is about impermanence. Yeah, sound is impermanent because it's a product of causes. Right away, We're talking about impermanence. Of course, we scratch our head and say, of course sound is impermanent. Of course it's a product. Of course causes. What's so spiritual about that? Okay. Well, at the time of the Buddha, there were people who recited the Vedas, and they said that sound was permanent. That the sound of the Vedas was permanent. It was uncaused, unproduced. And it was the holy sound. Yeah? So Buddhists have to come along and say, sorry, can't you see? Sound is impermanent. Yeah. Why? Because it's a product of causes. Yeah. So if I hit that, okay, there's cause, isn't there? There's the bell, there's the striker, there's me, there's all these things coming together. Yeah. If they don't come together, there's no sound. And listen to the sound as it changes after it's struck, after the bell is struck. Yeah. So, it may not be so important to us that the sound of the bell is impermanent, but the syllogism, my life is impermanent, because it's a product of causes. That's an important one. Yeah. My body is impermanent because it's a product of causes. My intelligence is impermanent because it's the product of causes. Okay? So to really explore what impermanence means. Yeah. The sound is just an example to help us understand the reasoning, but the real thing is to apply it to our life, our body, our feelings, our mind, everything. Yeah. In the same way, we study some of the reasonings for establishing non-true existence. Things are not produced by self, other, both, or causelessly. And the example is always given as the sprout. So, we always joke we're going to gardening class every time we go to study Nagarjuna's first verse in the Karikas, gardening class. The sprout is impermanent because it's not produced by self, others, both, or causelessly. Yeah. It's like, well, why are we, this gardening, how about something spiritual? But, God, the sprout is just an example to help us understand the reasoning. Yeah. But then we try and apply it again to our life, our body, our mind, our five aggregates, the self. And we try and see, how do things arise? How do they come into existence? And then that really starts to challenge some of our ingrained views. So the sprout is just the example. We must always understand Buddhism in the context of Indian spirituality. The Indians focused on the veritable fact that it is difficult to find a lasting peace and comfort in this life. True, isn't it? Yeah. We're not going to find lasting peace and comfort in this life. Doesn't mean we won't have any happiness, but we're not going to have lasting happiness. We occasionally find a measure of it, but it is always fleeting. When we get hungry, it's nice to have a good meal, but after a while, we get hungry again. What food can we eat that satisfies our hunger in a final way? When we are thirsty or tired, it is the same story, and so on and on. Thus, the Indians concluded that we will never find a final and stable peace in these temporary things. Even so, it is true enough that we do find temporary peace in these temporary satisfactions. And though it can never last, we cannot just give up eating and so on. Okay? So even though we're not going to find lasting peace in eating, we need to eat. We don't just say, oh, well, there's no lasting peace in eating, so I'm not going to eat anymore. We don't just say, oh, my body is made of, blood and guts, so I'm not going to bathe anymore. Please bathe, okay? So we should avoid going to extremes. We don't just say, oh, my emotions are out of control, so I'm going to stop meditating. I can't control them anyway. That's ridiculous. Okay. The Buddha was born a prince and lived a life of plenty for his first 3 decades, but he did not find satisfaction in the royal life of plenty, so he fled into the forest in search of a more stable peace. In his efforts, he adopted the time-honored Indian tradition of denial of the senses. The legend is that he lived for 6 years on a daily diet of just 1 sesame seed, 1 grain of rice, and 1 jojoba bean, along with water. It seems his efforts in this period were directed towards controlling the sensual impulse. And this is what happens, People, when they begin the Dharma practice, they start hearing about, attachment, and the evil thought of the 8 worldly concerns, attachment to only the happiness of this life. And the first thing they go to is, but what is the first object they say from attached to? Food. Then the new Buddhist practitioner, obsessed with food. I have so much attachment to food, constant attachment to food. And look at me, I can't control my eating. There's banana bread up there, and I got to get a piece of banana bread. I've got to get 2 pieces of banana bread. My mind is out of control. I'm afflicted by attachment. What's the solution? Stop eating. That's how I'm going to control my attachment. So I'm going to fast. Maybe I'll have a little bit of water. A little protein drink, something. I'll just eat the bare minimum. And the moment I see some attachment arising in my mind, I'm going to stop eating, even if it's after just 1 spoonful of Cheerios. I can't take that second spoonful because I have attachment, and I've got to stamp out this attachment by torturing myself. And that's how I'll conquer my attachment. This is an especially macho thing. Women do it too, so women can be macho. But it's this especially macho thing, I'm going to conquer my attachment. Beat down that attachment to Cheerios. I have no attachment to Cheerios, let me tell you. But some people, that's their object of desire. Very poor taste. When you can have chocolate, why do you want Cheerios? So people get so tight, so hard on themselves. Oh, I sleep too much. Now I'm going to sit up when I sleep, and I'm only going to sleep 4 hours. I'm going to conquer my laziness and my habit to sleep. So we get this kind of thing where we're fighting with ourselves. So Buddha did that for 6 years. And then what did he do? He stopped because he realized it didn't work. That torturing the body doesn't rid the mind of attachment. What rids the mind of attachment is wisdom. torturing the body doesn't get rid of the attachment. Yeah, so they're very important, that part of his life. And and then when he stopped, and he, somebody, he sat at a tree, and one lady thought he was the tree spirit and made an offering of, some rice, and they still make it now at special festivals. Yeah, rice with raisins and little things in it. And, and his 5 friends just said, "You flake. Yeah? We're sitting here doing austerity practices to conquer our body and attain liberation. And you go off and you eat some rice and milk. You are a failure. Total failure." And his friends just, despised him afterwards. It was just a total spiritual flake, to the point where even after the Buddha attained awakening, when he thought, the first people he'll teach will be those first 5, the 5 people who he was doing the austerities with. So he walked all the way to Benares to teach them. And when they saw him coming, they said amongst each other, "There's that flake Gautama. We're not going to offer him a seat. We're not going to offer him water. He's a flake." This was after the Buddha attained awakening. So, but when the Buddha approached, the power of his realization, without him having to say anything, set those guys scrambling, and they made a seat and they offered him water and so on. But at first they just shunned him. So imagine how that would feel. Your spiritual friend shunning you. We would all cry, wouldn't we? Yeah. What did I do? I don't like me anymore. Yeah. Okay, we can see that our sensual needs often draw us into many activities that ultimately harm us, such as stealing, killing, lying, and so on. At the very least, even if we control our sensual needs, they cannot be permanently satisfied. So the denial of the senses is probably an effort to finally subdue the impulses themselves. Ultimately, the Buddha-to-be decided that the denial of the senses too would not work, and he gave up that constraint. He returned to eating more normally. Can you imagine that? He started eating more normally. Wow. Yeah? Forging a middle way between indulgence and denial. Yeah, that's important. He, instead of the indulgence of the princely life and the denial of his ascetic life, some kind of middle way. You eat to keep your body alive. You take care of your body to keep it alive. Not because you cherish this body and think it's the best thing in the universe, but because it's the basis for a precious human life, which we use to practice the Dharma and get us out of samsara. So we have to take care of this body. Yeah. Same thing, we have to take care of our mind. We can't just sit there and torture our mind. Yeah. He returned to eating more normally, forging a middle way between indulgence and denial. It is the sensible approach of using the world rather than letting us use it. Whether or not you believe in a round of rebirth, you have to see that having bodies such as we do puts us in a position of vulnerability. And so long as we have this vulnerability, we cannot have a stable peace. So we have to take care of this body because it is vulnerable, but we then use this body to overcome our our vulnerability by getting rid of the craving and clinging that make us grasp at having this kind of body again and again. Okay. This is the heart of the Indian context of Buddhism, the search for a stable state of peace. I wonder, do you think in America people are looking for stable states of peace? Or do you think people are, if you ask people, do you think that say I'm looking for stable peace? Or do you think, what would they say? I'm looking for the next high?
The thought of peace of mind comes up.
Yeah.
For people sometimes.
Okay, I want peace of mind. Yeah. What does peace of mind mean? Yeah. Interesting. We should try that as an experiment. Ask people what they want out of life. I see an ordinary analog to this wish for peace and stability in our attachment to the digital world. In the digital world, everything is perfect and predictable. Really? Well, he doesn't have the same computer I have. It's totally unpredictable. And the things happen as they are supposed to happen. Really? At least that's the way we think of it. And we lose it, even get angry when things do not operate as they are supposed to. Okay, now he's getting to the reality. One day, walking in a beautiful country estate with a friend who was a longtime computer geek, we came upon an extraordinary Monet-like pond with cattails, reeds, and lotus flowers, all with a Japanese-style wooden bridge in the background. I said, see, the carbon-based world is pretty great, right? And he said, yes, but the silicon-based world is better. Looking for stability and predictability. We all have this longing for stability and predictability. Some philosophers, mathematicians, and scientists find an unearthly beauty in the world of mathematics, where everything is perfect and precise. Some even conclude that nothing is real but numbers. Though we may all long for it, it is very difficult to see any measure of peace and stability in this world. Yeah, especially now, huh? There is no one who is evidently beyond suffering. Even the most beautiful, powerful, and wealthy lose it all in the end. We just do not see anyone who clearly enjoys a state of stable peace. At least initially, it is a leap of faith to believe that such a state of lasting peace is even possible. There is just no evidence for it, especially nowadays. I mean, every single day, the news gets crazier and crazier. Every day when you think it can't get more crazy, it gets crazier. Yeah, just amazing. Okay, there is only the illusion of peace and stability, and we conspire together to believe in this illusion and to find evidence for it. Yeah, so why are we surprised when there's so much chaos in the country and in the world? As an illusion-based life form myself, it is hard for me to believe that there could be a world where the skies are forever unclouded, though I want to believe it. Indeed, Buddhists make the claim that there is a state of stable peace and that it is possible for any of us to reach it. The fourth of the four seals that mark an assertion as a Buddhist one is that nirvana is peace. Okay, what are the first three seals? All conditioned things are impermanent. All contaminated phenomena are dukkha. All phenomena are empty and selfless, and nirvana is peace. Okay? So that's the nirvana is peace, is the fourth seal. This mainly means that if you achieve nirvana, you will not fall from it. From the beginning, this was my main concern. I could not believe that any state could be stable. Yeah. Since I had these doubts, it was hard for me to make any effort to achieve nirvana, because I didn't think stable peace existed. Yeah, because everywhere we look around us, everything's changing, and whatever you think is stable falls apart. So he's saying, then how can nirvana be any different? Yeah. Maybe my concern was due to countless unstable lives in this round of rebirth, or maybe it was just due to the observation of an inevitable decay in this lifetime. I thought that if we are all born but inevitably die, everything seems to go in cycles, and we see everything come to an end. How could it be that any of us could achieve an understanding, find a state of peace, and never fall from it? Yeah? My question wasn't so much that, but it was, could this state of peace be consistently peaceful? Or would I get bored? Yeah, because every time prior, when I had found a nice situation, after a while I would get tired of it. So and the idea of heaven that was presented in the theistic religions sounded so boring. I had no wish to go to heaven. So I couldn't imagine, what kind of state of peace could you have that wouldn't end up being boring, where you want something new and exciting? That was my question. When I first met with the Dalai Lama in India in 1979, this is exactly what I asked him. As I understood his answer, and I have reflected on it for decades since, he said that nirvana is an utter eradication of suffering and the causes of suffering, such that they can never arise again. Thus, it is not simply that you have to understand something, and it's so great you will never forget it. People forget all the time, even important stuff. It is that you have cut the conditioned complete. You have cured, you have cured the condition completely, and there is no chance for it to develop again. So that answers my question too. Yeah, that whatever the cause of boredom is, it is removed in nirvana. So what's the cause of boredom? Yeah, attachment, isn't it? Then you say, but if I don't have attachment, then I'm really going to be bored. Yeah? So, okay, with attachment, I'm bored. But without attachment, I'm going to be even more bored because my attachment made me happy. There was something exciting to be attached to look forward to. Yeah? I'm just going to be a bump in a log without attachment. What a drag. Sounds worse than heaven. Okay. So it's hard to think, what would it be like to have a mind without attachment that would be not bored? Because we're so used to the attachment, to something being interesting and exciting and new and curious. And, if you take that away, it sounds so awful. Yeah. So what would it be like to not have that attachment and to have unending contentment? Yeah. Without attachment coming in saying, you really shouldn't be so content. without some thought coming in and saying, what are other people going to think of you? You're just sitting here being content. You should do something. Yeah. The most important topic of Buddhist philosophy is cause and effect, or dependent arising, I think you'd say. The Buddha is respected as one who discovered the causes of suffering and the causes of happiness. In his first sermon after the awakening enlightenment experience, this is exactly what he lay out in the teaching of the first of the Four Noble Truths, which today is the anniversary of that first teaching. He identified suffering, or dukkha, and the causes of dukkha, and made the extraordinary claim that there is a state beyond dukkha, and that there is a path leading to that state beyond dukkha. The basic procedure is that if you do not want the effect of suffering, of dukkha, do not engage in the cause for it. Yeah, and if you do not want the effect of a life, and if you do want an effect of a life free of dukkha, engage in the causes for such a life. Yeah, it's quite simply put, isn't it? Yeah. But then we say, but you say those are the causes to go beyond dukkha, but I don't like those causes. I want other things to be the causes to go beyond dukkha. Yeah. You laid out, the things that are the causes of happiness. I don't like those things. I want to do other things, our mind again. What is the cause of dukkha? And I'm saying dukkha rather than suffering here, because suffering, I think is quite confusing for people, because you sit here, right now, are you suffering? Most of us would say no. Yeah, unless you have a horrible stomach ache and you're just gritting your teeth. Yeah, but most of us would say, no, I'm not suffering. So then what's this talk of, suffering, 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 suffering? So that, that's why I think better to use the Sanskrit word when we just say dukkha. So people aren't familiar with dukkha, so they don't like that. But it's good, actually, because it makes, you have to learn a new vocabulary word, and it gives you the chance to learn the correct meaning that the Buddha is trying to get across, which is not that we're suffering all the time. Yeah, it is that basic experiences under the force of afflictions and karma are unsatisfactory. Yeah, they're just unsatisfactory. For whatever, different things are unsatisfactory for different reasons, but we're never going to find ultimate kind of peace or satisfaction in things that are under the influence of afflictions and karma. What is the cause of dukkha? According to Buddhists, the cause of dukkha is ignorance. This means especially ignorance about your own true nature. The guiding thought in South Asian spirituality, at least since the time of the Hindu Upanishads, is that we will be liberated by understanding our own inner nature as it is. Okay? So then this is a quote, I think this is a Hindu quote of some sort. The self-existent soul within, yeah, this is not Buddhist, pierced sense openings outward. Therefore a man looked out, not in. But a certain wise man in search of immortality turned his gaze inward and saw the self within. Okay, the foolish go after outer pleasures and walk into the snare of all-embracing death. The wise, however, discerning immortality, do not seek the permanent among the things impermanent. Okay, so this kind of verse talks about the first two kinds of dukkha, renouncing those. The ouch dukkha of pain, which nobody likes. And this one is saying, when you're looking outside for happiness, thinking happiness will come from external objects or people, then you're taking refuge in things that are impermanent and transient, that are always going to be disappointing. Yeah. So with this verse, these Hindu practitioners can renounce also the dukkha of change. Yeah. But the third kind of dukkha, the dukkha of the pervasive dukkha of conditioning, the non-Buddhists do not renounce that one. Yeah. Because they don't see afflictions and karma. They cannot define the source of samsara correctly. It is a truth of psychology and sociology that we are very much under the influence of how we view ourselves. Isn't that true? To a great extent, Indian spirituality is in line with this thought. Both Hindus and Buddhists determine that ultimately our natures are free of fault, and to realize this is to become free. What Buddhists identify here as ignorance, the source of all dukkha, is not simply not knowing something, but actively believing in the opposite of what is true. Okay? If you know you don't know something, then you are aware of that, and you may try to learn the truth of the matter. If you do not actually know something, but think you do, you will proceed confidently without searching for the real truth. That can get us in trouble. As Josh Billings, aka Henry Wheeler Shaw, said, "It is better to know nothing than to know what ain't so." Thus, initially, the challenge is to try to discover your own nature as it is, while keeping a wary eye on how you presently view yourself. So I like that. It is better to know nothing than to know what ain't so. So it's better to not have a lot of opinions and ideas about something than to have a wrong opinion, a wrong idea that makes your mind very closed. Yeah. And so I think that's the idea behind Zen mind, beginner's mind, that you come in without a lot of strong ideas and opinions. Yeah. So that you can actually learn. Because we can see in our life so much of our unhappiness is caused because we cling on to our ideas and our opinions. Yeah. So much unhappiness. Yeah. When we're, so many examples, when we're very attached to something, there's the idea, I must have that to be happy. I need that to be happy. Yeah. And that could be an object, it could be a person, it could be a schedule, it could be any number of things, praise or who knows. But I need that to be happy. And we hold on to that idea. It's kind of like, when you're in love, I need to be with that person to be happy. Yeah. There's 7 billion other people. But I can only be happy when I'm with that one, and I need that one. Isn't that limiting? Yeah? Isn't that limiting our opportunity to experience joy and connect with other beings when we say, I can only be happy with this one? And so it is with the other things, that we're attached to. I need that. Yeah. I need that kind of lamp in my room. I need that. You know? And then it becomes so important. I've got to have that lamp. I've got to. And then, you know, these people are preventing me from getting the lamp that I want. Oh, no, they're always doing that, interfering with what I want. I know they're doing it deliberately. They know I want that lamp. And so because they don't like me, they're deliberately making it hard for me to get it. How do I know that? I just know. I can tell by the look in their eyes when I say I want that lamp. That's how I know that they are deliberately thwarting my wishes. And to boot, they want this other person to get a lamp. They're so nice to this other person who wants a lamp, the same kind of lamp that I want. But they won't let me get it, and they're giving it to that person. Yeah. I know they're prejudiced against me. I know they're out to get me. Wow. What am I going to do? Ruminate, 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 ruminate. So angry, so jealous. Yeah, I've got to interfere in this situation and stop that because I want that lamp and that other nincompoop does not deserve it. Not by any means. You know, all of that is just conception, isn't it? It's just conception. That's all it is. It's just a bunch of stupid thoughts in our mind. And yet, we suffer. We're so attached to those thoughts, and we are so convinced that they're true, that we are willing to suffer to get our revenge, or at least to expose this other person for being partial and not giving us the lamp and giving it to somebody else. Even if I can't get the lamp, I've got to expose this person's partiality. Yeah? Crazy, isn't it? And yet we do it all the time. All the time. I know exactly what that person's motivation is. I know exactly what their real intent is. It's pathetic, isn't it? When you think about it, it's really pathetic. We just cause our own unhappiness. When I was a kid and I used to cry because I couldn't get what I wanted, my mother would scream at me, shut up or I'll really give you something to cry about. And I didn't really understand it at that time. But all my physical needs were met. I was not crying because I was hungry or thirsty or in a war zone or freezing cold or fainting from the heat or, injured or bleeding to death. All my physical needs were met. Yeah? So, what was I unhappy about? Something manufactured in my mind. So my mom was just trying to remind me that, you think you're unhappy because of something that you've manufactured in your mind. But if I whack you, then you'll have some physical suffering and maybe you'll realize what pain is and stop manufacturing that. Yeah? Everybody's mom say that? Yeah. But they were right, weren't they? I hated it when she said that. I hated it. You don't understand me. I'm not really complaining. I'm not really being a spoiled child. I really need this and you're not understanding me. But actually, she was right. Yeah, it just took me 50 years to realize it. Yeah. Next lifetime, when my mom says that, I should say, you're right. I'm dreaming out, I'm fabricating unhappiness. I will stop. Now, can you imagine? You're a screaming mom and your kid says that? I want to do that to my mom. Yeah. You're right, Mom. I am. You're absolutely right. I'm a brat. Yeah. I'm a total spoiled brat, fabricating things to be miserable about. Thank you for showing me that. Okay, where were we? Okay. In the same way that it is a belief that it is ignorance that gives rise to all suffering, it is another article of belief that the wrong understanding of your own nature can be completely eradicated. So, two fundamental principles in Buddhism. One is our dukkha is caused by suffering. Two, it can be eradicated. But that is easier to believe than the assertion that once eradicated, the wrong understanding cannot ever be reseated. Not for me. Yeah, not for you either. Yeah. Yeah. But you can see, in the 16 attributes of the Four Truths, one of them, when it talks about true cessation, is saying that dukkha can never reemerge because there is that doubt in some people's mind. So some people, doubt that cessation is even possible. That's my doubt. And then his doubt is, it's possible, but it's fleeting. It's going to go away. See, it's interesting. You can see in the 16 attributes of the Four Truths how these kind of ideas are counteracted. We all have experiences of overcoming misunderstandings, so it is not too hard to imagine overcoming even this challenging and persistent misunderstanding. However, we all know stories or have had the experience ourselves of forgetting what we formerly knew. Okay, let's pause here. There might be some questions, comments. I was just thinking that, sometimes when you study the 16 attributes of the Four Truths, they sound a little bit dry. But then here it is, they're not dry. This is exactly why they're there, for the doubts that torment us and that keep us from practicing.
The longer I practice, I realize that a lot of what I brought into Buddhism, the misconceptions from my previous upbringings, religious upbringing, that this powerful feeling that I'm inherently flawed, that there's a kind of, I can get only so far, but there's something that's wrong about me.
Yeah.
And that I can't get over that no matter how hard I try. And so when I meet up against, that's one of my fundamental ones, is that I can go a long way and be a good person, but to eliminate the fundamental cause for my misery, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Because I don't deserve it, and I'm just seeing imperfection as being a sin or a flaw, rather than just being because I'm under the control of my afflictions and karma, that it's a temporary state, that it's a permanent state of existence.
Right. Yeah. That's the flawed way of thinking, isn't it? My ignorance is permanent. There's no way to overcome it. Do what I may. I'm always flawed. I'm always less than. I'm always undeserving. I'm always, fill in the blank. Yeah, and that thought puts us in prison, doesn't it? Just puts us in prison, you know. I am inherently flawed. Nothing to do about it.
Saying make it into a syllogism because it makes it more like ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
I'm inherently flawed
Mm-hmm.
because my ignorance is permanent. It's like you can't really go with that.
Yeah. But you have to realize that your ignorance isn't permanent. Yeah. So then you have to have another syllogism. My ignorance is not permanent because, what are you going to give us the reason? My ignorance is not permanent because.
It arises due to causes and conditions.
Yeah. But, okay. So that means it's temporarily impermanent. But that doesn't negate the continuum of temporary moments of ignorance. Yeah, that doesn't negate that. So you're going to need a different syllogism. Okay, because it's adventitious. Then, why is it adventitious? My ignorance is adventitious because
the nature of the mind is basically pure, but I have to prove that too.
Yeah, okay, so you do that. Because see, this is how you use reasoning. Yeah? One thing, it isn't that you just get one syllogism and bang. You have to go back. Okay, so what was your syllogism? My ignorance.
My ignorance is adventitious because the nature of the mind is pure.
Because the nature of the mind is pure. But why does the nature of the mind being pure make your ignorance adventitious? Can't the nature of the mind be pure, but ignorance be permanently on top of it?
No, ignorance is impure by nature. Those two are mutually
can't
exclusive.
it just lie on top of something that's pure? Can't you have a diamond that's always covered in a rag?
Isn't that what adventitious means?
Adventitious means temporary.
Right.
Yeah. So, but how do you know your ignorance can get removed? You can't just say it's adventitious. How do you know it's adventitious? How do you know it's not the nature of the mind?
Do an easier example. So I just switch it to like the word maybe defilement instead of anger. And I can prove to myself my defilement, say if anger isn't always there,
Mm-hmm.
and to me, seems like you can kind of say that certain levels of ignorance aren't always there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so ignorance can come and go, but how do you know it can be cut completely? The same state of ignorance or anger, whatever it is, may not be constant, but how do you know it can be covered completely or eradicated completely?
Maybe because the wisdom is going to be completely opposite.
Okay, so explain that. How is the wisdom opposite?
It's natural that hot and cold can't coexist.
Okay.
And so in the same way, I'll do it by example, in the same way, two things that are opposite, like hot and cold, ignorance and wisdom of a certain type
Okay,
can't
but why are
coexist.
ignorance and wisdom opposite? What is ignorance doing that wisdom is doing the opposite of?
They're both looking at the same thing, one with a mind of wisdom and one with a mind of ignorance.
Okay, go on. Go on. What does it look like to look at something with a mind of ignorance and to look at it with a mind of wisdom?
What's appearing to the mind of ignorance doesn't exist as it appears, where what appears to the mind of wisdom does exist as it appears.
Okay, so what's appearing to the mind of ignorance?
True existence.
Yeah, and to the mind of wisdom?
The lack of true existence.
Okay, so how do we know that true existence isn't a correct mind?
We have to meditate. Direct experience. No,
How do you
we'll
know
there.
that true existence isn't the nature of reality? We believe it is.
Do.
We believe all day long. Why isn't it possible?
For that to be possible, at least in terms of inherent existence, then things would have to be unrelated to any other factors, and that's impossible.
Yeah.
But I think the answer to Daniel's question is the non-affirming negative.
Yeah, but wait, let's not go there.
Okay.
Yeah, but the point is here, do you see how you take one thing and then you have to get another syllogism and another syllogism? And you see how the whole proof for the existence of nirvana and awakening hinges on emptiness, hinges on dependent arising and emptiness coming to the same point. Yeah? So you might remember when we did in Buddhism, one teacher, many traditions, I went through this argument that Nagarjuna did in the Karikas, proving the existence of the three jewels. Yeah, so what was the hinge, what did that whole argument hinge on? Yeah, dependent arising and emptiness. Yeah. So then you really see how, crucial that understanding is. Okay. So you can't just say, oh, ignorance can be eliminated because the nature of the mind is pure. Well, so what? Nature, mind are pure. So what? What in the world does that mean? Yeah. So you have to have other things that, pure of what? Yeah, it's pure spaghetti sauce. Yeah. Nature of the mind is pure spaghetti sauce. So how does that make enlightenment possible? What in the world is it pure of? Yeah.
Is it correct to distinguish between logic and reasoning and direct experience? And did the Buddha arrive at enlightenment through logic and reasoning, or was it some kind of direct insight?
Both. He needed logic and reasoning to get the right understanding. Then he meditated on the right understanding, combining serenity and insight. And from that came direct experience. And it was the direct experience that actually liberated him. But he couldn't go from being, Siddhartha in his palace to direct experience.
Yeah, I guess I always thought that, the Buddha, he went off and he sat under a tree and then he had an insight into reality and then he used logic and reasoning to explain it to people, to convince them.
No, he used logic and reasoning to get the correct understanding. Because otherwise, if you don't know have some idea what emptiness is, how do you know when you're sitting there and you have some fantastic experience that that's the nature of reality?
That's what made it so magical, that moment, like he stumbled onto this secret.
Yeah, and that gives us the hope. I too, with no effort, will sit there and reality will dawn to me effortlessly. That's what I want.
There's effort.
Yeah.
There's a technique.
Yeah, we like that kind of, I want some magic. A spirituality. Shouldn't I have some magic? And reality just dawns and I recognize it instantly and it dispels all my wrong ideas and makes me eternally happy. What in the world is this reality? Do you have any idea? What do you think is going to dawn to your mind? What are you meditating on to get this reality to dawn to you? Do you think you just sit there and go, duh, and then it's going to come? You see?
Just to put it in the story form, the fact that the Buddha had his first two meditation teachers that took him to the actual absolute pinnacle of meditative concentration, and he knew that wasn't it.
Yeah.
Shows us that doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, in the story, we think that the story looks like the Buddha was just ordinary Joe Blow. he had many lifetimes of practice under his belt. Many lifetimes. He wasn't, Joe Blow working at the gas station last life. Or maybe he was, but he was a really, had a secret practice.
Doesn't some direct experience, isn't some direct experience required in him having figured out the logical things by observing phenomena and observing not necessarily the direct experience of the nature of reality, but of
other things. Reasoning always has to be traced back to direct experience in one way or another, but it isn't necessarily the direct experience of reality, that you have the direct experience of reality, and then on that basis you get the logic to prove it, and then you realize it. No, it's you have direct experience of other things that are simpler, that are easier to understand, and then that helps you build up an understanding by using logic and reasoning. And then when you meditate, you break through the conceptual appearance involved in the reasoning and go to direct experience.
Little that we know of the Buddha, it does sort of sound like, austerity practices, some rice milk, to the Bodhi tree he went, and that's it. But then you see 45 years where he basically unpacked his entire process of how he got to that place.
Yeah.
So it's almost like we saw, in some way, we did see the result, and then he unpacked it from that backwards.
Right. Yeah. But he didn't invent the logic to explain his experience to other people.
Right. He had that already to get to the awakening, and now he was going to share it with us.
And the thing is, if you could go directly from being Joe Blow to the direct experience, why would the Buddha have spent 45 years teaching? He wouldn't have. He would have just sit there and say da or di or whatever you want, and it'll come to you. Why did he walk around and teach so much? So this theme is not a new one. These questions are not new. This was actually the theme of the great debate at the end of the 8th century in Samye, between Haoshang Mahayan, a great Chinese abbot who advocated for blank-minded meditation and said, all conceptions, meaning also all reasoning, all logic, it doesn't, are useless. Just empty your mind of everything, and then you'll have the direct experience. And that's what that whole debate was about.
In Vipassana, you observe things.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like a direct observation. You don't empty your mind, because that's not possible. But it's, it is free of conceptuality, from my understanding.
You're observing those things, but if you're going to realize, how do you, I think there's different ways to approach things. Yeah. And here when you're talking about Theravada Vipassana, okay? So maybe you're observing things, but then the thought, the understanding comes in your mind. Let's say you're observing your mind, and you see how your mind's changing every moment, or your body's changing every moment. Yeah? Right there is the syllogism. My mind is impermanent because it's changing every moment. Yeah. So you don't have to sit there and say, screaming to yourself, my mind, my body is impermanent because it's changing every moment. But you meditate and you see the change, and then your mind has that syllogism right in it. Okay?
Yeah, because the goal is to see impermanence and dukkha and selflessness in the
But you
phenomena.
see how the reasoning is still there. Yeah. The reason I'm emphasizing this thing about reasoning is, just to give you an example, I read the story of one rabbi who became a Zen practitioner, and he did a Zen retreat, and his conclusion from the retreat was that God existed. Okay? So, just think about that. And then, that shows why you need reasoning.